Alright, I know what you guys are probably thinking, especially with the recent announcement of the new expansion. You're probably thinking, man, should I start up my WoW account and start playing again? Well, lucky for you, I did, and this is how it went. But first, I should give you guys a little bit of my history with this game. I haven't played WoW in any sense of competitive or hardcore fashion since, well, probably Cataclysm, all the way back in 2011. Now, I would be lying if I said I haven't played or logged in occasionally to see how things are going. I would just always end up fizzling out when I tried to level to the current level cap and seeing how things have changed. I always found myself losing interest in the game right around the level cap, just due to the grind and the nature of the beast. I believe a lot of it had to do with how somewhere around the time of Cataclysm and the transition over to Mists of Pandaria, it really felt like the developers kind of ran aground on the lore and the story that they had carried over from Warcraft. Now they were left up to their own devices as to try and create a compelling and driving narrative. And it felt like, as far as importance go, it kind of fell to the wayside when it was compared to trying to pump out content to try and keep revenue high from the subscriber count. And you couple that with some less than enjoyable, mandatory daily grinds that really just started to appear everywhere, and you have a recipe for what created the biggest drop off in player count in World of Warcraft history. I should know, I was one of those people. So with that said, let's fast forward 12 years into the future. Here we are. We find ourselves on the precipice of another expansion being released in the upcoming months, and I asked myself, just like you are right now, should I return to the World of Warcraft? Well, after a bit of back and forth, I decided, you know what, screw it. I'm going to give it another go. So I thought I'd make this video detailing my experience over these last couple weeks for you guys. So maybe it can help you determine whether or not it's worth your valuable time. I truly do hope you guys enjoy it, and if you do, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. So, with that all said, let's get into it, boys. So immediately, right off the bat, I already began to realize the scope of just how much has changed in this game from the last time I played. Little things like the character creation screen, all the way to the larger things like how entire class systems have been revamped and changed into things that are so different than I last remembered. Even the general experience of leveling in World of Warcraft has changed so much, mostly becoming streamlined, extremely streamlined. You know, from the moment I logged in to the moment I logged off, there was a bunch of pop-ups that would hit across my screen telling me to do this or do that. It was like I misclicked on an ad on a naughty site. Now, honestly, these were a bit off-putting to myself at first, but after a while, I basically just stopped listening, and I went about my way doing whatever it was that I wanted to do, regardless of how efficient or inefficient it may have been, which honestly is exactly how I always play this game. I just enjoy flying across all the vast continents, exploring the hidden gems, just absorbing the grand scale of this huge virtual world, and just strictly for the fun of it. There are few MMOs out there on the market with a world as vast and as rich as World of Warcraft. So you should be able to explore every inch of it if you so choose, and not feel like you're forced into following such a linear path. Something that I believe the older versions of this game, basically all the way up until Wrath of the Lich King, really embraced. I think you can just sum it up to having the ideology that the entire leveling experience was part of the game. Not just an obligatory chore that you had to rush through so that you could reach endgame, so that you could actually start to play the game.
What do we do now? What do you mean? Now we can finally play the game.
The entire leveling experience was the majority of the game for many players, especially those that never even really saw in-game content, but they loved it and enjoyed it regardless. I believe a lot of this has to do with how we as players have changed in our mindsets. In today's world, the norm mentality is to try and min-max everything to the best of your abilities as fast as possible. Whereas when WoW was in its infant years, I believe the mentality at the time was more along the lines of just playing the game to play the game. Which brings me to the biggest change I noticed in the World of Warcraft leveling, that is level scaling. Now, level scaling, at least to me, seems to be Blizzard's answer to the problem of having 9 expansions. I mean, if we're being honest, without the inclusion of level scaling, you would literally have to level up through 8 different expansions in order, one by one, just to finally reach the current expansion and see everything that's relevant and happening at this point in time today. This would leave the player base so separated from each other and make the world feel empty as a result. I think this problem stems from how World of Warcraft was initially progressed. You see, in other MMOs, such as old school RuneScape, items that were released 15 years ago are still viable and useful items, and not just junk gathering dust in your bank. Whereas in WoW, top-tier heroic raid items that were best in slot at the time are literally being replaced by common green quest rewards 2 hours into the newest expansion. It makes it a complete waste of your time as a new or returning player to try and enjoy the older content and play through it chronologically. You are more or less forced into a rat race to the current expansion, or else you're just wasting your time. So there is absolutely no chance that a new player would or should take the time to travel and quest their way through all the previous content just to then have to quest and level through the current content, to then have to grind through all the other crap just to possibly see any of the high-end PvM or PvP. It's just not going to happen. So I do completely understand Blizzard's approach to level scaling. Essentially, their hands were tied. It was basically the only solution that they had to try and compete with the problem they had created. And not all people enjoy all previous expansions. Like, for example, I'd rather step on a bunch of Legos than do another run through a boring tundra. So the opportunity to level through zones and expansions that I find more enjoyable is a nice touch. However, I do feel for a new person, it leaves them lost as to what is even going on in the game. Why are we fighting this person? Why is this person alive in this expansion and gone and never talked about in the next? You have no idea of the scope of your actions or previous actions of NPCs. At first, I honestly thought I was going to hate the idea of level scaling because it would constantly leave you feeling like your character is never truly progressing, because each level or each couple levels you're still fighting the same mobs and they're just getting harder and harder and harder, making you feel like you're getting weaker. But thankfully, in retail WoW, the leveling process is so quick, you don't even have time to think about it, and you're onto a new zone, a new expansion, and then before you know it, you're up to the current expansion. Questing. Okay. So I've recently been playing a bunch of old school RuneScape like a madman, and that game contains some of the absolute best quests and story-driven narratives in any MMO without a doubt. So I'm going to try and be an impartial judge and not weigh too heavy on the fact that any and all of WoW's quests are, well, rather bland and uneventful. Now, occasionally on some rare instances, you might find one or two that either have a funny writing style behind them or may in fact have a little bit of depth to them when it comes to the story. But in the vast majority, it's really just go kill 10 of these and collect 10 of these. Or go light this on fire, or go put out this fire that's already started. Sometimes you'll get enjoyable mechanical opportunities like firing a Gatling gun at innocent bystanders, but those are few and far between. Seriously, Blizzard, you'll need to step it up on the questing game. You're falling a bit behind. And I do think I speak for everyone when I mention that we all miss the days of being a random group of ragtag adventurers and heroes, not literal gods that raw stomp everything we come across. We don't need to hear how great we are in every dialogue exchange. Sometimes I just want to be a troll shaman that enjoys riding his raptor around and fighting dragons. I don't need to be the next thrall. I also don't think I would be the minority if I said that I wouldn't mind stopping the endless grinding of dungeons to get to max level if the alternative was compelling quest lines and narratives that actually felt impactful to the world and rewarded you not just in items and gold, but rather in lore and fun, engaging, challenging activities. Speaking of dungeons, in its current state, at least so far from what I've experienced, the meta to level up is basically just through spamming dungeons. Specifically if your class has the ability to play as the tank and healer, which more or less essentially guarantees an instant queue on the dungeon finder. I actually found myself enjoying doing dungeons, but I believe a big part of that can be in part to me having a couple buddies on the Discord to play with, along with the fact that I'm currently a tank, so queues are not an issue. And getting into groups that wipe often hasn't really become a thing for us yet, as I think the content is just a little too easy to experience that yet. But I can definitely see, if you're approaching this without a group, how spamming dungeons repeatedly one after another and getting some less than favorable party members here and there could make this feel like a slog. Especially if you're a DPS character and have to wait over 5 minutes for each queue. Now, once you reach the starting level for the most recent expansion, it does seem the fastest way to level switches back over to questing and exploration of the new zones, which I do think is a good thing, because I don't feel like it would lead to the best player longevity if your entire tenure on World of Warcraft was to essentially just grind out dungeon after dungeon after dungeon to get to endgame, only find out endgame was grinding out even more dungeons, just this time with different caveats to mob encounters. I think a healthy balance of questing, exploration, and dungeons create the best experience for new and returning players to reach endgame. You know, one major thing that I do have to give Blizzard a lot of credit on, and it's never really changed from the start, and it's probably one of WoW's greatest attributes when it comes to getting new players and returning players, is the fact that for being a game that has so much going on visually and huge immersive worlds that are filled with players and interactive environments, the graphical requirements as far as your PC goes has always been well within the general public means. I mean, you can run WoW on some very outdated equipment. Now, you're not going to be on ultra detail, but you can definitely still run it and experience the vast majority of what this game has to offer, which is something that I think is taken for granted when you take into account how much better everything looks now in today's WoW compared to even when I was playing heavily back in Mists of Pandaria. I don't think Blizzard does get enough recognition when it comes to this aspect of WoW, and it's something that has helped people who may or may not have had the means of consistently upgrading their hardware to be able to play and still enjoy the game that they love. One of the coolest things that I've noticed upon my return was the new mode Mists of Pandaria Remix, which is essentially just giving you a current character with current skills and abilities, but set back in the lands of Kung Fu Panda. Now it has the added rewards of cosmetic transmogs and mounts. The XP rates are absolutely insane. They allow you to level up characters in record times. The best thing is that once the event ends, right around the release of the new expansion, all the characters that you've just leveled up will then be transferred over to regular retail WoW, ready to rock and roll. This has been such a fun experience leveling multiple alts. I really want to say how enjoyable this little seasonal event has been, and it's been awesome to experience Pandaria with everyone running around and seeing the servers so full of life. If you do decide to come back to WoW, I cannot recommend it enough that you at least give this limited time mode a shot. All in all, yes, I do have some gripes here and there about how my experience has been back on World of Warcraft. But I do want to say that I've honestly had a really good time playing again. From my perspective, WoW is in a pretty decent place as of late for the returning player. It honestly will not take you too long to reach the current content. Granted, this is coming from the perspective of someone who has just returned over the last couple weeks, and I would definitely consider myself to be a casual player at the moment, with the intentions of being a more hardcore player soon once the new expansion comes out. It has been an absolute blast leveling up all these new characters and seeing just how much everything has changed. And a lot of stuff has been added into the game. Does it have its issues and quirks? Absolutely. But as does any game, especially one as old as WoW. The game has changed immensely over the last 2 decades, on some parts better than others. But from a filthy casual perspective, I think the game is still very enjoyable. And I will most likely give an updated video on my viewpoints down the road as I progress further and further into my returning playtime. And we'll see how enjoyable WoW's endgame really is. Until then, I'll see you all in the next video.